we're going to talk about transformational process in a variety of systems, and I do have your image for this, the circular diagram that you have.
Right.
So, how would you like to introduce this topic of transformational change?
Well, I like to say that I was, during the time Virginia was alive, I was also studying to become a Jungian analyst, and I had a need inside me to interrelate Virginia's work with Carl Jung. And so I devised this chart combining Jung and Virginia. And the most exciting thing about it to me was that I showed it to Virginia, and she looked it over carefully and she said, I think it's great, and you need to add practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see that practice is on the upper left side there. And she was so practical. And of course, we have to keep practicing. And so I added that. And I think that it came out in a way that I could look at systems in cultures as well as in individuals and families. That was the exciting thing about it to me. I presented it to Jungian groups, and they also were very, I felt it was representative of Carl Jung as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is very exciting. That had to get combined inside me, and this was one of the first manifestations of it getting put together inside me.
Can you give the audience a basic introduction to who Carl Jung was and who
Yes.
Virginia Satir was before we get to this change model, especially as you've distilled or you've tried to integrate some major pieces from their work. Can you just start by giving us an introduction to your experience of Virginia Satir and then Carl Jung?
Yes. Well, my basic experience of Virginia is she took complex ideas that other people wrote many words about and distilled them into clear, simple words that large numbers of people could understand in all cultures. And she put it together with role play and action, and so the body was involved, and that made it translate between cultures. I think Virginia's deepest mission was to contribute to a change in consciousness in the world. And so she didn't write in, quote, professional language. She wrote to the masses of people. And that was her great gift. That was, she intentionally used very simple words. So some people have thought that that was indicative of simplicity in her thinking. If you look at it very closely, it is complex ideas put in very simple terms that are understandable and usable to people all over the world.
How would you compare and contrast that specific aspect of Virginia's work with Carl Jung's work? Because
Well,
Carl Jung's work is
much more dense.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, Carl Jung, the story about him is that once someone was commenting on something he had written, and they said, this Dr. Jung doesn't really fit right here. And he said, well, it must, because I thought of it while I was writing this page. And so I think that he had a flow from the unconscious sometime, and it wasn't as clear as it might be. But on the other hand, if you digest much of what he wrote, he moved from Freudian thought to a growth psychology. And he saw a quote problem or a symptom as a block in the natural flow of growth that happens in everyone. And so it was just an obstacle along the path, not a neurosis, not, well, he used that word sometime, but not not something that couldn't be passed over to continue the natural growth that was instinctual in everyone.
And was that in alignment with Virginia's way of thinking about symptoms?
And that's exactly as Virginia thought. And he
Mhm.
also brought in the spiritual aspect in his way of thinking. He had a respect, a sense of deep respect for each individual, as Virginia did.
Mhm.
Virginia spoke of a sense of awe for the uniqueness of each person. And I think Carl Jung also saw that, the, the, the uniqueness of the person and the manifestation of the ability to grow and change and transform in each person.
Laura, can I
So,
ask you, just by
yeah,
way of also furthering explain your experience with Carl Jung's work and Virginia Satir, what's the difference between a Jungian analyst and a family therapist? You know,
oh my.
yeah.
Uh, well, Carl Jung tended to work with individuals, though he was quite aware of systems and he made some attempt to analyze cultural systems as well. Um, he was interested in the unconscious of the individual and the unconscious of a culture. Uh, and he didn't look so much at family system that the person um, developed in as being a major factor in their psyche. So Virginia saw an individual living within a system, within a system, within a system. So the intrapsychic in a family, in a culture, uh, in a um, the field of all knowledge of humanity over time, she saw us living within systems, and that was her major focus.
Mm-hmm.
Though it wasn't outside of Carl Jung's thinking, it wasn't at all his major focus.
Mm-hmm.
He was interested in the unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that there was something missing in each other's work that was in your experience a big blind spot for the both of them? Like maybe Jung would have really benefited from some of the things that Virginia was doing and vice versa as you studied
Well,
them?
certainly, Jung would have benefited from the systems analysis of family systems. Uh, Virginia might have come sooner to recognize her work as having a spiritual base had
Mm,
she tied in with Jung, but in time she did come to that place.
mhm. So you,
Her
you did,
work, I think, was always had a spiritual base, but uh, she only recognized it in the 80s.
mhm. Yeah, I guess I'm curious about as you integrated these two huge bodies of work and as we talk about transformational change as such a broad topic for all human beings, what are the pieces that you took from Virginia's work and what are the pieces that you took from Carl Jung's works that were similar between them and then were also different? So this idea of sameness and difference, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Virginia was very positive. Uh, and the idea in the middle of my diagram of death and rebirth is Carl Jung's, uh, because death comes before rebirth. The dark night of the soul, Jung writes about. Virginia uh, didn't look so much at death as she did birth.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that's one difference. all the steps to the left of movement toward integration and more wholeness are from Virginia. I don't think Carl Jung walked us through the steps of transformation. Generally, consciousness brought transformation in Jungian thought, but to Virginia, there were very specific steps that happened. We had to tell the truth without blaming. We had to have courage. We had to have humility. Yes, compassion for oneself and for the other. Whereas Jung talked about increased consciousness, but these other traits that had to happen, like focus on this transformation and practicing what one had learned, and forgiving, which wasn't easy for Virginia, but an important piece of her thinking was forgiving of ourselves and other people in order to move on.
So that piece about forgiveness, you didn't really find so much in Carl Jung's work?
No, not really.
Yeah.
No, Jung took what was in the unconscious that came in dreams and followed that. But he didn't direct us to steps like this that Virginia did in order to move from the coping mechanisms to growth.
Can I ask you, how did Carl Jung's work benefit your life? I mean, because one of the things as I'm listening is like, it seems that Virginia's work was very practical. Like you could see there was steps, that things that would change in relationship. And then Carl Jung's work sounds very internal, sounds, working through the unconscious,
Right.
working through dreams, working through fantasy. How, I'm sure they had benefit, but were they different in nature, or were they? Could you
Well, I
describe that?
think I dove into my unconscious more deeply when I was in Zurich, and my dreams were coming frequently and intensely, and directed my life. And I hadn't had that experience with Virginia.
So it's like the energy that you connected to in the unconscious manifested and came more and more into your conscious life, and it would direct and influence you in that way.
Very much so. I gained a deep respect for my unconscious, and I was able to follow what I dreamt. Sometimes I had foretelling dreams. I just didn't know what riches were in the unconscious.
How do you want to share your model? Like, I want to hear from you. What's the best way to?
Well, the most profound part of it that was consistent with Virginia and with Carl Jung is that this circle process is ongoing throughout life. It never ends. It never ends. And what we hope will happen is that we'll move around the circle more rapidly as we live longer and as we understand our coping mechanisms, that we will move past them sooner and re-enter the circle and move toward transformation. But then another foreign element is bound to happen, and another separation and a sense of wounding and abandonment will happen. And that's Virginia's crisis. Uh, the idea of dismembering in the crisis, the chaos, is a Jungian thought. It's like being pulled apart, like your body is literally pulled apart. You're dismembered. Uh, so I think the graphicness of that and the intensity of that chaos came through from Carl Jung's thinking. Um,
So maybe we could just start with the basic outline of the transformational change. So where would you begin, and maybe you can walk us through the major components of it.
all right, I like to walk through it as an individual and then as a culture as well.
Okay.
So the top of the chart begins with a sense of equilibrium, a sense of well-being, uh, calmness, centeredness that we have at times when we feel an integration. And then the foreign element comes, and this separates us from ourselves. We feel wounded, we feel abandoned, we feel betrayed, and we have pain. This is inevitable in life. It's going to happen. And the dismembering sense happens. And then I borrowed this term from sociology, this term liminality, sort of betwixt and between is what liminality is defined as. It's like you can't go back to where you were,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't know how to go forward. And so you're in this betwixt between place and feel confused and afraid. And at that point, to deal with the fear and the confusion, we fall into coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms. And these serve well, I found, at times in cultures like in Russia during the time of communism. To be able to deny some of the pain that was happening was essential, because the next terrible thing would happen the next moment, and it was impossible to bear so many
Mm-hmm.
pains. Uh, but
So
we fall into these coping mechanisms, and they're on the chart as projection, denial, uh, depression, suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, a deep deflation. And we're coping, just coping, not growing, just coping, just managing to keep our heads maybe slightly above water. And what's required for the change is both from Jung and Virginia, but particularly from Jung, is the numinous kind of experience, the experience of light, the experience of something that would uh, allow you to see things from another angle. And sometimes it's like seeing a movie, like hearing something from a friend, like
mm-hmm.
maybe a dream. One of the best
Can I just
ways.
backtrack you a little bit, Laura? Because
Yes.
I want to ask you two questions. One is you made this distinction with this example in Russia about where maybe certain coping mechanisms are healthy. Can you describe to the audience when when we're in sort of a healthy coping with some of these maybe more basic defense mechanisms like denial or projection? Is there a healthy use of them and then unhealthy use? Is that question
Yes.
make sense?
Well, I think when they're unconscious, and so they turn on in an automatic way, and we don't really know what we're doing, this is an unhealthy
Mm,
way to cope with it.
beautiful. Okay. Yeah.
But when we are conscious that it's all too much right now, and we just need to divert our attention, and
Good.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
then that's, I think, a healthy use of coping.
Okay. Okay. So the awareness, the consciousness around what you are doing, if you're aware, okay, that this is me denying my experience because there's just too much to hang on. Maybe I need to compartmentalize it so that I don't go
Yes.
insane. That is a healthy
Yes.
use of it.
Yes.
Great. And in your chart, what flows from coping, and this is a word that's outside the circle, deflation. Can you describe or define that? What is deflation?
Well, on the opposite end is inflation, a sense of well-being, which can lead to inflation. Uh,
Okay.
Deflation is a loss of sometimes a sense of who you are and what your life is about. Uh, Sometimes a sense of desperation,
Mhm.
uh, loneliness, sense of being lost. Um,
Is
uh,
that a Jungian term, or where does that language come from of influence?
that's a Jungian inflation, deflation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's akin to being connected to life force or connected to your capital S self. Does that fit in
Yes, I
terms of,
think so. Yes, so that the deflation would be a loss of sense of self.
okay.
Yeah. And when that happens, one is in like the dark night of the soul, as Jung would call it, uh, lost,
Mm.
not knowing where to turn.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the wonderful thing about the unconscious is that it wants to break through. It wants to give you light. So there's something inside you that wants to give birth to a new way of seeing. Uh, but it's frightening. It's frightening because it's really a giving up of the old way. Uh, it's letting go. It's a kind of surrender
Mm.
to what might come next. And I found that dreams are one of the best ways that I've found to find a way to re-enter because they give me another way to see things. But talking with a friend who can help you see another angle, something that will add light.
So this, now you're at the bottom of the circle. I think you're describing the numinous experiences that allow us to re-enter. Is it re-enter life or re-enter?
Re-enter life,
Yeah.
yes, feeling alive, uh, seeing things from another angle in the darkness, seeing a little bit of light in the tunnel, seeing some light at the other end,
Mm-hmm.
uh, some hope. Hope comes with it.
And so you describe dreams as that would be an example of a numinous experience, Laura, that
Not
can,
all dreams, but some
mhm,
dreams, yes.
some dreams can.
Some dreams can guide you in that way.
Um, would you describe Virginia's use of family reconstruction as a numinous experience?
Can be, yes. It can be like a new way to see what's happening to you
Mm-hmm.
so that you get free from the inside, free you, through the inside, you gain freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So she would offer a new way of seeing. But Virginia um, created in sculptures and pictures what Jung saw in dreams. She created a picture on the outside of you to say, "Will it look like this?" You know, and then when you could see it and it fit with your insides, there was a sense of relief. Jung was very careful not to lead the unconscious in any way, so he wouldn't create something on the outside that would be an image. I think Virginia's gift was she could join with you in creating these images so that you were totally free to say, yes, it fits, or no, it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you didn't follow blindly the teacher and say, okay, that's it. Because she partnered with you in such a way to work with the unconscious that you really felt the partnership and you felt able to say, yes, that's it. No, that's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so she egged along the unconscious by creating images for us to consider of what might fit for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess maybe the words with where it has equilibrium at the top, it
Mm-hmm.
might also include the word known, like what's known to me. And then at the bottom, it seems like you're descending into the unknown.
Yes,
unconscious.
that's good. That's good. Yes.
Yeah, because the way that you're describing it is, and I'm just trying to think about therapy and what is happening in the therapeutic process, which is, a parallel to the process of growth and transformation, hopefully.
Yes.
Um, it what is happening that allows us to descend into the unknown, and um, I guess how would you maybe relate that to your own experiences of where do you take people, and how when you're, I guess, do you see yourself actively inviting them into the unknown in order to have the numinous experience? Because if you're within the known, then you're not going to experience that. You're using the same schemas, the same
Well,
patterns, right?
I don't think that we invite people into it. I think people fall into it.
Mm, okay.
And
Yeah.
that's when they come to us,
Right.
when they fall into this unknown and they feel frightened, or they feel confused, they
Hmm.
feel chaos in their lives. They've fallen into it.
So
We
they're
don't,
already there. They're already
they're
there.
already there.
Mm.
Yeah, it happens. We don't have to invite people into it. It happens.
Mm.
Yeah.
I guess I see a tension between when someone is hanging on to a defense mechanism. They're at one time feeling the chaos and the unknown, but then hanging on to the defense mechanism for a sense of control. For example, I'm thinking of like OCD, right? Like their energy is
Right.
going into that particular pattern of
Yeah.
control, of washing hands, and it's a resistance to a full um, delving into the unknown, right? And I think.
So see, the job of the therapist just to help them be aware that that's what they're doing.
Hmm.
When you wash your hands, often you feel more secure. It
Hmm.
helps you feel secure. You're looking for some way to feel secure, and you can't imagine any other way.
Hmm.
So it's a becoming conscious of that defense mechanism and how you use it that allows you to have more choice.
Hmm.
It's consciousness that gives choice.
Hmm. Do you have a metaphor that you like to use for this reentry? When you fall, like, is it is it like you're trying to get into a boat or you're trying to surf along the waves? Like, what's a way of a relationship that one can think of that's a healthy relationship at this point when it is you're in this point of deflation and you're trying to reconnect to life? What is the relationship to the unknown, or what's the relationship to the unconscious, or yeah.
Hope maybe is the big issue, and I think we as therapists carry that
Hmm.
for the person. It's what in social work is called like lending your ego
Hmm.
uh, to help sustain the person so they can imagine not having this coping mechanism, imagine letting go of that uh, because they can hold on to you.
Hmm. Is there an image of how you think about the relationship between yourself and the people or the person that you're helping? Um, and maybe a metaphor or an analogy that illustrates the way that you like to think about how you are in relationship to others.
I described the therapist as putting on their X-ray vision so that you see inside the person that little screaming baby that just says, I want to be loved.
Hmm.
You see inside the spirit of the person, the higher self. And so you connect with that higher self. Virginia uh, said in the 80s when she began to talk about the spiritual aspects of her work, she said, um, in order for any transformation to happen, I have to connect with this essence of the other person, the deep spiritual essence of the other person. And when that's done, then change can happen.
Hmm.
So I think that's my image is you put on your X-ray vision and you see uh, that higher self inside the person, that self that's connected to the great self. to the
Mm.
life force.
Does your way of being and your way of perceiving the people, the person that you're with, does that help bring people to more fully experiencing a numinous experience? Is that an important
Well, I think
aspect of it?
to be holding that they've lost sight of
Yeah.
uh, gives them more courage. To be
Hmm.
holding that for them and reflecting it back to them.
Hmm.
Am
Okay.
I speaking to what you're asking me?
Yeah, I think so. Um, well, we're still at the bottom part of the circle, and I'm trying to understand what the numinous experience is, how people can be supported in the face of that,
Yes.
and yeah, what is that? That seems like a critical phase in this process. You know, you get into the foreign element. There's a crisis. You can't go back anymore. You maybe go to defensive coping, and then there's this transition. There's the opening to make a conscious
Mhm.
choice.
You
Um,
know, I'm confident that the unconscious will show the person the way. And I'm confident that I'm listening with them
mm,
to find that. And I don't know what it will be. It will be a surprise to me. If I think I know, then I'm really off because it's unique for each person. So I'm listening with them for their
mm,
guidance.
mm. That's such a
And
beautiful. Yeah. I think that speaks to the image because
uh,
it's a stance. I'm
uh,
with you. I don't know, and I'm willing to be surprised with you, but I'm here with you. You know, I
right.
think that's such a beautiful image because it can be so scary being in the unknown.
Yes. Yes. And I absolutely know in myself that the light will come, that I will be led by them, and we will both perhaps be surprised.
Hmm.
But I know that it will happen.
I think this is where the therapist's use of self or connection to self is so important because of I think I don't know if it's the strength or it's the willingness to stay in that unknown, to not have to quick answer or to give a quick
Right,
advice or to fall into
right,
some kind of thing out of fear.
right.
I think it
To hold that space, just hold that space
hmm
for what's going to break through, knowing that it will.
hmm yeah, there's such a tremendous trust in the way that you describe it and in the way
Yes,
that you work that I really appreciate, that you're not rushing or forcing anything, but you're patiently waiting for this force, which you're calling the unconscious, to show the light. Um,
yes.
could you describe that in any more detail? Um, Anything that's important to that particular part of the process of change?
I'm thinking of a client of mine who dreamt uh, that she lived up on the mountain in Colorado, and she and her husband, and uh, she she dreamt that there was a treatment center there for adolescents, and her husband was the director of that center, and she had to go there, and it was the way out of that darkness. Her husband was her teacher, and she needed to listen to him. He was there and treating the adolescent in her. And
Mm.
it was such a huge relief when I said this to her about her dream. Uh, of course, she said, and she was a Freudian analyst, he was a Jungian analyst. Uh, that didn't really is what made the difference, but the difference was that she hadn't really been listening to him, and she hadn't revealed to him parts of her adolescent self that were causing her a lot of pain in life. Uh, but the dream directed her to trust him, to lean toward him, to go to his center for treatment of her adolescent self. Uh, so this was her breakthrough that came in a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that helps to
It
clarify.
does, yeah. And it reminds me of something I recently read about, where Virginia emphasized the importance of observation, and the
Mm-hmm.
relationship between observing and theoretical knowing, that if the theory didn't match what she was observing, she'd be very quick and willing to throw out the theory and go back to being an observer.
Yes.
And with what you're describing, with how important it is to listen, to be patient,
Yes.
to trust, I mean, that's all in the stance of observing. And
Yes.
that's, I think that's a beautiful and concrete. I mean, it's a letting
Mm-hmm.
go. It's a letting go of that I need to know. It's a letting go of our addiction to, um, yeah, the known world or the known patterns of how we engage with life. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, because there's certain attitudes that are there that a therapist could use, or any individual could use. When I'm lost, I have to try to get to a sense of trust. I have to trust that light is coming, or life is there. Listen, and to look. And sometimes it's too overwhelming, so you need some help. So you need someone to
Right.
be beside you, to look with you, and to
To
be.
hold the space
Hmm.
and to believe in you, believe that you'll find your way, and to
Hmm.
be willing to follow you to find
Hmm.
your way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that as you describe your ability to hold that space, to have that faith, or to trust the unconscious, that
Right.
some kind of new, because in the dream provides a map. It's a pathway, an insight, um, a different way of looking that you described, a different
Yes.
perspective that one can then not just think about, but one can live. How do I relate to my husband, uh, from my adolescent? How do I relate to my own adolescent self in a way that's maybe more open or accepting, or something like that?
Or let him touch that part of me
Mm-hmm.
uh, that I've kept secret.
Mm-hmm.
Into our relationship, that part of me,
Mm-hmm.
into our relationship.
Right. And to think of that part of her as a resource rather than something to be ashamed about, to keep in the
Yes.
in the basement or something.
Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to move to the next part, which is movement towards transformation? This is some of the
Mm-hmm.
words are responsibility, of mourning, of commitment. Uh,
These words are all from Virginia because she's the one that gives the map. She's the one that gives the practicality.
mhm,
Um, uh, well, I think the courage, Virginia had her 7 C's and her 7 P's. I don't even know what they all are now, but courage and commitment were among them.
mhm.
Uh, and I have those on my chart. And truth telling, it's sometimes so hard to tell truths that we don't want to believe, but it's like facing the reality of things and allowing ourselves to mourn with compassion for ourselves and for other people. That we join the human race again in our own frailties.
Is there a central concept that organizes this part? So from the numinous experience towards transformation, what's maybe the maybe there's a bunch of things happening, but what are the things that are happening that help us transition with the numinous experience, the insight, the dream.
I think
Um,
we walk into what we're defending against. And these traits on the left side enable us to walk into whatever we were defending against.
okay, so
By,
I'm gonna slow you down. I think that's a big idea. So
yeah,
we walk into what we were defending against. We're
yes,
we're facing what we fear.
right,
We're facing what we hate, what we think we
yes,
hate. We're facing our hurt. We're facing our trauma,
right.
and then that's where the words like responsibility comes in. Is that like and I hate to think linearly about this, but I just wonder with these words, is there a way that you would sequence it, or is there a way that you like at this point is it responsibility is the first place to begin, that this is my experience, and maybe looking at these words. Um,
I like your question. I think that I tried to put them in sequence because
mhm,
courage is the first step, I think. And then telling your truth without blaming yourself or anyone else. Uh, and then I just tied right in with that is humility, uh, to join the human race and admit your frailty. Uh,
hmm,
and then I think the commitment and focus kind of go together, that you're committed to continue this path and to stay focused on it. And in order to do that, you have to mourn what wasn't and what isn't.
mm, mhm,
To be more curious than blaming was one of Virginia's uh, descriptions of the detective hat. It allows you to be more curious than blaming, so you're exploring, uh, and and so that curiosity becomes important. But with this comes increased consciousness, uh, and increased compassion for yourself and all humanity, for the human uh, condition that you're a part of. Yeah.
mhm, mhm,
So you kind of rejoin the human race and forgive yourself. And then toward the top on the left is increased self connection. So you're more deeply connected to yourself and to the higher self, to the
mhm,
life force.
mhm. Yeah, so I see increased congruence, connection, connectedness, compassion, consciousness with self and other.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I just want to come back to what you were saying, because I wonder if a way of describing it is responsibility, commitment, courage, curiosity. These seem to be very important internal resources that allow us to move through transformation. And
Yes.
even though I was asking, is there a linear sequence? There's somewhat of a linear sequence to them.
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah, but then also it's like it seems like a foundational um, attitude or
Attitude, yeah.
way of being with the experience that allows you to move through it, and then therefore you can experience more. What gets expressed maybe is more congruence in the experience of greater connection
Right.
and compassion. Um, so I was just thinking, linear in the sense that some of these things may be things you actually do. Okay, so now it's time to make a commitment to this part in your life, um, and then but maybe underlying it is like there's a sense of responsibility for yourself throughout.
Right. And I don't think we consciously say, well, I'm going to make a commitment to this. I think this is where the therapist comes in most of the time, is holding the person's hand to allow them to have uh, the courage to walk into what it is they've been defending against.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, on our own, I think we can have generally an attitude in our life of commitment to become more conscious.
Hmm.
Like it's the highest goal, that it's what life's about.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautifully put. Yeah. um and I think um i I think it is, because Virginia had within the self-esteem maintenance kit, the courage stick. So she would
Hmm.
sort of describe an actual um, an image that people might actually use, or think about, that they're going to face their fears, but take their courage along with them, as a
Yes.
resource to face it. Um, okay, so then as we're moving through those phases of courage, of humility, of curiosity, and then there's an expansion of consciousness that happens. Can you describe
Yes.
the next phase of the transformational
Well,
change?
I think it just begins to happen. This transformation begins to happen so that we've kind of integrated uh, whatever we were falling apart about on the other side, and and the energy transforms. Uh, Energy is uh, well, energy was Carl Jung's word for God. Uh, Life force is Virginia's word. The energy transforms so that you're seeing things a new way and you've integrated it into yourself. Uh, and the transformation comes upon you. You can't make it happen. It comes
Hmm.
upon you as you do all the things in movement toward a transformation. It's the part of the process of rebirth, but we can't make a rebirth happen. It comes upon us as we do these things.
Hmm. I think this is a very important point, and one that I'm not quite getting at this moment, because I think as we're living in a capitalistic society, we think, okay, if I want something, I can go to the store and I can go get it, right? And
Uh-huh.
I pay the money and I make it happen. But what you're saying is in, and I'd like you maybe to describe a little bit more, what's unique about this transformation. You can't make it happen. It comes upon you. There's a
Right.
very specific way that you're describing it that I wonder if you could make even clearer.
Energy is not tangible. It's not something you can hold on to. It's something in constant motion.
Hmm.
And your attitude and your openness to change uh, allow you to walk toward it. Uh, and then as you walk toward it, you become more conscious of the new learnings, and that brings a transformation. The greater consciousness brings it. Uh, you can't make consciousness happen either, though you can move toward it. Uh, you can grapple with it and stay on the edge of it and listen to your dreams and listen to your intuitions and uh, move toward the light. Uh, but you can't make the energy transform. Uh, I don't know how else to say it.
You know, what you're describing makes me think of there's a general idea that we should all be more loving to ourselves, and that sounds nice. I should be more self-loving,
Right,
and but I think if I haven't gone through transformational change, the notion of self-love will fall within the same pattern of it's something I have to do. So then I define self-love as I eat right, or I exercise, or I read lots of books, and it's this maybe this productivity kind of thing. But I don't feel really loving towards myself. So it's a difference between doing something, and then I guess what I'm trying to understand more is it's not something you can force upon yourself. But what is the difference between that, right? Making a change of like maybe I'll change my behavior and stop smoking, and a transformation where something in my consciousness shifts, and then behavior likely changes from that. It's a different thing you're describing, Laura, and I want to
right,
make it as clear to people because this is very relevant to the different models of therapy. Different models of therapy intervene or
right.
support different types of change.
Well,
And
sometimes you do change the behavior, and that leads you toward the transformation of energy.
mhm,
Uh, so that's not a bad thing to do, to change the behavior. But that alone won't bring the transformation. The transformation comes uh, with a change of your way of being, your way of um, relating to life
Mm-hmm.
as a whole. Your way of transformation comes with attitudinal changes that are very deep inside you. Uh, these attitudes of compassion and awareness of common humanity and being a part of humanity. But these, and your personal awareness that happens through dreams or images or
Mm-hmm.
reconstructions or whatever, so that you see life differently.
Can you give
You
an example?
actually see
Mm-hmm.
it differently.
Yeah. Could you
Uh,
give an example, Laura?
well, maybe an example is right now my pain. My pain is from a disease called rheumatoid arthritis, but I am not my pain. Uh, I am having that experience, and um, I am more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I constantly am aware of my connection to life as being much bigger than the pain. And that is a transformation of the pain, though it doesn't go away. It's pain is different than suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I don't think of myself as suffering. I'm having pain, but I'm more than the pain. I don't know if that helps it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things you said a moment ago is that it's a change in the way that you're relating to life, and I think if it sounds like you're you're experiencing the pain, but it doesn't become all of life. Um,
It
it's
doesn't run my
it
life.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't run your life.
It exists, but what my existence is more than the pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you relate to the experience of pain itself?
Say more about what you're asking me.
Yeah, you know, Viktor Frankl would talk about what is the meaning of your suffering, right? Can
Yeah.
you find a meaning within it? And when you talk about relating to life and the attitude that we take with it, whether your pain is a part of life, it's a part of your life at this moment, and
Mm-hmm.
how you're relating to it, how you're relating beyond it. I think they're related. They're not the same, but um, they have to do with coping and coping in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you can, if it fits to describe that in light of what we're talking about of transformation. That uh,
You know, it's been my teacher.
yeah.
Uh, my pain has been my teacher. I'm humbled by it. I'm uh, I'm I'm slowed down. I have to think about things I'm doing and prioritize them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I I can't not have it. Uh, so I have to embrace it and breathe with it and
Mm-hmm.
move with it and recognize that it is a part of me. Uh, so there's room for it to be because it is. It just is. And so I will live in relationship to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. The idea of allowing pain to be a teacher, that you're not trying to fight it. You
Right.
acknowledge it.
It's,
You're
yes.
embracing it, breathing and
Yes.
moving with it. Um,
Actually, if you fight it, it only becomes worse.
mhm, mhm. No, I think that's a great illustration of what you're talking about. By transforming your relation to life, you change your relation to all of life, including the parts that are really difficult.
Yeah.
Mhm. some final pieces that you want to share about the transformational cycle?
Well, I think that it's good to try to see it in terms of cultural transformation. And so I wanted to spend a minute trying to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think that um, our culture right now uh, has often been inflated and felt superior, and foreign elements come in, uh, like now the coronavirus, and it does cause separation and wounding and sense of abandonment and betrayal. Um, and we can fall into copings
Mm-hmm.
uh, that maybe are part of the present riots going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, though there's real reason to riot, there's real injustice that's happened. There's also a projection of the pain from the wounding onto the world that's happening, carries an extra load. It makes it more violent, perhaps. Uh, and I think a reentry can happen as we humble ourselves, really humility, as we, um, and this is difficult to happen when we're focused on America being great again and America being number one, and we're not part of the world,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because reentry would come with having compassion on humanity
Mm-hmm.
as a whole, and that would mean beyond our national boundaries. That would mean humility as a nation. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that would mean awareness of our common humanity as a nation and courage to see that without thinking that it would distract from our own self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so maybe that gives some idea of how
I
to
think,
walk around it.
yeah, no, I think taking this current situation is and looking at especially those, I mean, looking at the whole cycle that we're moving through, and I think moving through repeatedly,
Mm-hmm.
but looking at those resources, the movement through change, the movement through transformation is going to require us to be courageous, to be humble, to be curious, compassionately, to tell
Mm-hmm.
the truth without blame,
Mm-hmm.
to be committed to what? Our highest values, say,
Yes.
to mourn what's lost and the tremendous pain that's occurring, and for each to take responsibility. I think it's a beautiful and powerful vision for society broadly, and certainly a movement towards peace. As you said, our primary aim is to expand our consciousness, because I think with the expansion of consciousness, we can be less violent.
Well, that was Virginia's primary goal, uh, to help the world be more conscious.
Hmm.
As that's what she saw as a transformation of the world, and she really believed in the hundredth monkey idea, that when a sufficient number of people become
Mm.
more conscious, then the transformation can happen in human consciousness in our
Mm.
world. She believed that. And in fact, I've often quoted what she said in 1987 at Vista Hermosa when she said, there's a new energy alive in the world today, and I'm part of that energy.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, and she said, when people can begin to meet not as doctor, whatever, but as one human being to another, then transformation can happen in the world. And she said, and to this end, I commit my life. Won't you join me?
Mm.
Wow, that was big.
Wow. Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps hearing you
I
say that
have
to
them
me.
too. I have them too. Because she
Well,
really believed that it could happen and she wanted us to join her.
mm,
And, you know, Barbara Joe said a wonderful thing when Virginia died. She wrote in an article, Virginia will carry on. And I think that she got the message that Virginia's passion was raising world consciousness, and that's what we're carrying on.
hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel so joyful to be connected with you, that I have a chance to hear from you, to learn from you. I experience a kind of movement through transformation myself as we were talking,
Yes,
to be even more committed to my courage to move through change, and to trust my own resilience, or to trust the energy within me,
yeah,
and to trust the energy within other people, that the life within them um, can be trusted, even though the coping may be dark.
absolutely. Yes,
Hmm.
that we each have the God within.
Hmm.
You know, uh, Virginia's last visit to family camp after I was leading the camp, she threw kisses to the group and said, "From the God in me to the God in you." It's the first time I ever heard her say the word God. Uh, but that's what she was connecting to, that higher self and the other person, and that in her, and through that transformation could happen in her work with people
Hmm.
because they connected on that level.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and
And
I.
that's what we can do with the world. We can connect on that level.
Hmm. And I certainly feel connected and appreciative and profoundly respectful for the divinity within you, that your life force to me is so visible in the body of work that you is behind you, but then also in your presence right here, right now. And so
Thank you.
I thank you for being with me today, and I can't wait for the next time.